This is the disturbing banned animations iceberg. Tier 1. Death Note. Ever hated someone? Like, really hated them? The kind of hate where if a magic notebook fell into your lap and all you had to do was write a name and poof, they're gone. Well, that uncomfortable little thought experiment is basically the engine behind the animated series Death Note. In the show, a teenager finds a supernatural notebook that can kill anyone whose name is written inside, and decides to use it responsibly. Criminals only. Predictably, that self-control lasts about 5 minutes. Power does what power always does. By the time the series really gets going, he's lying, manipulating, framing innocent people, and eventually pushing the woman who loves him into sacrificing herself for his plan. The audience eating this up was mostly middle schoolers and teenagers. Kids with very little control over their own lives were suddenly faced with a fantasy about total authority over life and death. Of course it appealed to them. That appeal didn't go unnoticed. In the US and China, students started recreating Death Notes at school. No one actually died, but names did start showing up. And things like this.
A Richmond public school student is suspended over a list of classmates he wrote in a book titled Death Note.
And this.
A suspicious list of names prompts an investigation at a local school and concern from parents. Shelby County school officials say that the list, called Death Note, belonged to an East Middle School student and contained names of other students and staff.
Similar incidents cropped up in China. In Shenyang, students were buying special stationery and copying the rules from the anime, writing names backwards and assigning fake deaths for fun. One student even admitted that when they got tired of studying, they wrote down the names of teachers and celebrities they disliked. As the Death Note craze spread, administrators everywhere started to panic. Not because they thought Death Note would turn kids into killers, but because it encouraged teens to play with judgment and punishment without consequences. It let them rehearse the idea of deciding who deserves to live. That fear had real outcomes. Death Note was banned in parts of China, starting with cities like Shenyang and later expanding to places like Beijing and Shanghai. On June 12, 2015, China's Ministry of Culture officially listed it among 38 anime and manga titles banned for moral and safety concerns. 6 years later, in January 2021, Russia cited similar worries. Authorities argued that the series could negatively influence young viewers, especially teenagers, by romanticizing violence and presenting moral authority as something an individual could simply take for themselves. Critics called the bans excessive. After all, nobody actually died. Supporters argued that the danger was symbolic, that normalizing extreme power fantasies for impressionable minds was the real issue. In the end, the notebook was never the problem. The problem was how easily people, young or old, fall in love with the idea of absolute control. Winnie the Pooh. Imagine being the president of China in the mid-2010s, fresh off a US trip. You did the handshakes, smiled for the cameras, survived the diplomatic circus, and then checked social media. Instead of praise, there it was. Photos of you walking with Barack Obama, side by side, with the Winnie the Pooh strolling with Tigger. Winnie the Pooh is a children's character created in the 1920s by British author A.A. Milne and illustrator E.H. Shepard. He's a soft-spoken bear who lives in the 100-acre wood, worries about honey, and spends his days wandering around his friends Piglet, Tigger, Eeyore, Rabbit, and a polite kid named Christopher Robin. For nearly a century, Pooh existed as a harmless comfort media for everyone except the president of China. The whole thing kicked off in 2013 during Xi Jinping's visit to the United States. Someone noticed that a photo of Xi walking beside Barack Obama looked a lot like Pooh ambling along with Tigger. Xi was rounder, Obama was taller and bouncier. And once the internet saw it, that was that. A year later, it happened again during a meeting with Japan's Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe. This time, Xi got cast as Pooh and Abe got labeled as Eeyore, which probably did not go over too well. From there, the comparison snowballed. In 2015, during a large military parade, another Pooh-Xi comparison popped up online, and by then, China wasn't really seeing the harmless fun side of it. Feuding with a honey-loving cartoon bear doesn't make a lot of sense, but to be fair, being compared to one doesn't exactly project the image of a strong leader who can flatten your country if pushed. Around 2017, Chinese authorities began quietly censoring Winnie the Pooh online. Images vanished, searches stopped working, and memes were deleted almost as fast as they appeared. In 2018, things escalated further when the website of HBO was blocked shortly after comedian John Oliver spent several minutes on air mocking Xi's apparent sensitivity to the comparisons, while also talking about China's human rights record. That was apparently a 2-for-1 deal no one in Beijing enjoyed. The censorship didn't stop with memes or foreign TV sites. Disney's live-action Christopher Robin never made it into Chinese theaters in 2018. Analysts later said Chinese authorities saw the whole thing as a direct attempt to undermine the dignity of the presidency and Xi himself, which is a remarkable amount of political weight to put on a cartoon bear in a red crop top. South Park. A middle-aged man steps off a plane in China, suitcase in hand, smiling like this is a normal business trip, even though it clearly isn't. He looks relaxed, confident, and wildly unprepared for what's about to happen. Inside his suitcase is weed. A lot of it. Back home, he's a suburban husband with 2 kids and a mortgage. Here, he's about to find out that none of that matters. This is Randy Marsh from South Park, a show that's been on since 1997 and built its reputation on grabbing every taboo, controversial, or ridiculous idea it can find and shoving it directly in your face. South Park follows 4 boys living in a small Colorado town, Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, and uses them as an excuse to satirize politics, religion, corporations, and whatever else is unfortunate enough to be happening that week. The show was created by Trey Parker and Matt Stone, who built their entire career on seeing how far they could push things without landing in jail. In the 2019 episode Banned in China, they pushed directly at Chinese government censorship and Hollywood's willingness to gut creative content to stay profitable in the Chinese market. In that episode, Randy is arrested on the spot after Chinese authorities find weed in his bag and is thrown into prison, where executions, forced labor, and political re-education are treated as routine. At one point, his cellmates include Winnie the Pooh and Piglet, who were locked up simply for being banned characters. Outside the prison, the episode shows movies being rewritten scene by scene to satisfy censors, executives issuing desperate apologies for imaginary offenses, and characters literally erasing parts of their own stories to remain marketable. China's response was immediate. After Banned in China aired, South Park was banned entirely in China. Episodes disappeared from streaming platforms, clips vanished, and searches stopped working. Even indirect references to the show were scrubbed. The series effectively ceased to exist online within the country. But this wasn't even South Park's first offense. An episode showing Buddha snorting cocaine set off Sri Lankan authorities. Any mention of the Prophet Muhammad led to bans, heavy edits, or full removals across parts of the Middle East and the UK. Even in the US, some networks refused to air certain episodes without major cuts, because, by American standards, Parker and Stone had wandered way too far into please don't air this territory. What makes South Park different is that the bands never really slowed it down. The show didn't apologize, didn't pivot, and didn't soften its tone. If anything, the censorship just became fuel. Later episodes openly mocked the bands themselves, and Parker and Stone leaned even harder into doing whatever they wanted. Consequences be damned. More than 2 decades later, South Park is still running, still winning awards, and still getting banned somewhere on Earth every few years. And yes, the animation still looks like it was made in Microsoft Paint, because why fix what works? Family Guy. Have you ever been at a fair and seen a baby in overalls sing about marijuana with a talking dog backup singer? Around you, grown adults are dancing, singing along, and waving bags of weed like this is all completely normal. Well, welcome to the town of Quahog in Family Guy. Family Guy follows the Griffin family, who are unconventional in every possible way. Peter is a reckless blue-collar dad, his wife Lois keeps the household from falling apart, their daughter Meg is pretty much invisible, their son Chris is confused, their other son Stewie is an evil genius in diapers, and Brian is the martini-drinking, cigarette-smoking family dog. That's really all you need to know to understand why this family's misadventures keep getting them into trouble. The marijuana song in Season 7, Episode 12 was all it took for Venezuela to freak out. After that episode aired, the Venezuelan government banned Family Guy entirely, claiming it promoted drug use. And it wasn't just Venezuela that decided they didn't want to deal with the Griffins. Malaysia banned the show because of its constant vulgarity and adult humor. And Russia pushed to ban it after taking offense to the way the show portrayed the country as corrupt and full of illegal substances. Apparently, cartoon jokes can hurt national pride harder than actual sanctions. In the US, Fox refused to air the 2010 episode Partial Terms of Endearment because it tackled abortion. And over the years, multiple episodes were quietly edited or pulled for religion, race, or other sensitive topics. Through all of that, Family Guy just kept going. The show never tried to behave. It just kept going from bad to worse like Peter after his 3rd beer, leaving everyone else to decide whether to laugh or turn off the TV. Peppa Pig. Imagine you're a 4-year-old pig hosting a very serious tea party, and your little brother shows up holding a spider he pulled out of the bathroom sink. He names it Mr. Skinny Legs and drops it into the dollhouse. You panic, call your dad, and he calmly explains that the spider is harmless, even though his body language strongly disagrees. This scene is from Peppa Pig, a British children's cartoon that began airing in 2004. The show follows Peppa, a 4-year-old pig who's the oldest of siblings, as she jumps in muddy puddles, bickers with her dad, and picks up basic social rules in short, 5-minute episodes meant for toddlers. But when Mr. Skinny Legs aired in Australia, broadcasters ran into a problem. Australian spiders aren't cartoon nuisances. They can be medically dangerous, and kids are taught to stay away. So when Daddy Pig tells Peppa spiders are harmless, he's basically handing out life-threatening advice. Parents worried kids would try to copy what they saw and learned the hard way that Peppa Pig does not live in Sydney. Because of the risk, Australian networks quietly pulled Mr. Skinny Legs, along with another episode called Spiderweb, to avoid encouraging dangerous behavior. That should have been the end of Peppa's troubles. It wasn't. A few years later, Peppa ran into a completely different problem in China. In 2018, the character was briefly scrubbed from Douyin, China's version of TikTok, after users turned her into an ironic symbol of rebellion. A subculture calling themselves Hittin, or society people, started using Peppa in memes and videos as a way to mock authority and embrace rule-breaking behavior. The government didn't appreciate a children's cartoon becoming shorthand for social defiance, so Peppa quietly disappeared from the platform. The show itself survived, but Peppa's street cred didn't. And that's why Peppa Pig ended up on this iceberg. Sausage Party. What if your grocery store came to life, and it was aggressively raunchy, angry, and existentially depressed? That's Sausage Party. It's a 2016 animated film that follows Frank, a cheerful sausage, and his bun girlfriend, Brenda, in a supermarket where all food believes in the great beyond, a paradise waiting after humans buy them. When Frank discovers it's a lie to keep everyone calm, he tries to expose the truth. Cue religious collapse, violent rebellion, graphic deaths, and every adult joke you can imagine. There's also an orgy somewhere in the mix. By the end, the film throws in a final twist that blatantly reminds you the characters are animated and voiced by actors. Because why not smash the fourth wall while you're at it? You can see why it's on this list. China, Kuwait, and Malaysia banned Sausage Party outright for explicit sexual content, graphic violence, and language that crossed every possible line at once. Singapore allowed it only after heavy cuts. Even in the United States, the film was strictly limited to adult audiences, with theaters posting warnings because parents kept bringing kids anyway, and then acting surprised when the talking hot dog started talking about orgies. Sausage Party took a medium most people still think of as kids stuff and turned it into an exploration of existential dread, religious satire, and aggressively adult humor. People just aren't used to animation being this grown up. Attack on Titan. A quiet little town sits behind massive stone walls. People are doing their daily chores. Kids are playing in the fields, and for a minute, all seems well. But then you look and see a giant, naked humanoid peering over the wall. Seconds later, people are grabbed, bitten in half, and swallowed while screaming. That's how Attack on Titan opens. In the anime, humanity survives by hiding behind 3 enormous walls to avoid being eaten by titans, gigantic human-shaped monsters with no apparent purpose beyond cannibalism. Eren Yeager has always wanted to eradicate them, and when one of these attacks kills his mother, it finally pushes him and his friends, Mikasa and Armin, to join the military. Their job is simple and suicidal. Fly around with swords and hope they're fast enough to not get eaten. Okay, that's not all it is, but you get the premise. Attack on Titan premiered in 2013 and quickly became a global hit. You could not scroll on the internet without seeing someone hit this pose. It was praised for its tension, brutal honesty, and willingness to kill characters without warning. It also didn't shy away from political themes, mass death, war crimes, and the uncomfortable idea that humans are very good at becoming the very monsters they set out to destroy. And as we've established, anything beyond Pleasant Goat and Big Wolf isn't passing censor boards with flying colors. So in 2015, China banned Attack on Titan outright. Officials cited concerns over youth development, pointing to graphic violence, disturbing imagery, and morally complex themes. Which is government speak for, this is way too intense and asks too many uncomfortable questions. Characters are eaten alive on screen. Children die. Authority figures lie constantly. and the line between a clear hero and villain dissolves fast. Other countries followed with their own objections. Malaysia censored the show heavily, sometimes slapping black bars over anything that looked even slightly indecent, including the Titans themselves, cause they're mostly naked, so they had to give them underpants. Russia joined in later, banning the series in 2021 over concerns about its psychological impact on minors and its bleak worldview. Despite, or maybe because of, the bans, Attack on Titan only grew bigger, developing one of the most enthusiastic fan bases out there. They've been called insensitive and weird for complaining when episode 73 of the final season was delayed due to a real-life earthquake in Japan. And some have even tracked down the show's directors and threatened them for not matching fan preferences. Tier 2. The Simpsons. Imagine getting the drop on who's going to win your country's presidential election in 2024. 24 years ahead of time. As a throwaway joke in a cartoon. That's the kind of reputation The Simpsons has built over the years. Somewhere along the line, people stopped seeing it as just a sitcom and started treating it like a low-budget oracle. Elections, corporate mergers, sports outcomes, disasters, you name it. If it happened, someone can usually point to an old episode and say, yeah, they called it. Add the internet, a few conspiracy-minded fans, and the fact that people behind the show have recently shown up in places and documents nobody wants to be associated with, and you get a messy reputation and a never-ending supply of controversy fuel. At its core, though, The Simpsons is still about the Springfield family. Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie, using satire, exaggeration, and bad behavior to poke at culture, politics, and social norms. The humor works because it's willing to be uncomfortable, and sometimes that discomfort turns into actual consequences. Take the episode 30 Minutes Over Tokyo, for example. Homer attends a sumo match in Japan and treats it like a baseball game. He eats loudly, ignores the setting, panics when a wrestler steals his pretzel, knocks the guy out, and then throws the Emperor of Japan into a crate full of sumo thongs. The rest of the episode is a parade of misunderstandings, accidental insults, and enthusiastic cultural misfires. That's the joke. Americans abroad being loud, clueless, and deeply embarrassing. Japan never aired the episode. Broadcasters in Japan, Hong Kong, and other parts of the region quietly avoided it entirely, deciding it was easier to pretend it didn't exist. This wasn't an isolated case. China banned the show in 2006 alongside other foreign animated series. The official explanation was that they were trying to protect local animation and limit foreign influence on children. The show eventually resurfaced years later on streaming platforms, although some episodes never made it back. Venezuela pulled The Simpsons from morning television in 2008, arguing that it was inappropriate for children. Officials worried kids might imitate Homer's behavior, which is fair if you consider the fact that the man has violent tendencies and is borderline alcoholic. In 2012, Iran banned the sale of Simpsons toys, claiming the characters promoted immoral behavior and unhealthy lifestyles. None of this slowed the show down. Episodes kept airing, reruns never left rotation, and the predictions continued. Despite many people debunking the so-called prophetic powers, it still hasn't stopped people from treating it like a warning label for the future, though. Record of Ragnarok. Imagine opening Netflix to see a battle between gods and humans, and one god's looks has you side-eyeing the design team. That's what happened in India when Record of Ragnarok premiered. The show, based on the manga Shumatsu no Valkyrie, kicks off with the gods of every mythology holding their once-a-millennium meeting. And this time, they decided to wipe out humanity. They're just about ready to erase humans from existence when Brunhilde, a no-nonsense Valkyrie, convinces them to give humanity one last shot. A tournament called Ragnarok. The rules are straightforward. 13 gods fight 13 humans in one-on-one battles to the death. If humans win 7 fights, they get another 1,000 years. If they lose, that's it for the whole planet. The matches take place in the Valhalla arena, and there's added stakes to this. Ragnarok is fought between souls, so when a human dies in the arena, their soul is gone forever. The battles are intense. Zeus, Shiva, Thor, and Poseidon step in for the gods, while humans said Adam, Jack the Ripper, Nikola Tesla, and Nostradamus. History and myth mashed together with no concern for historical accuracy. Then came the controversy. In the Indian release, Shiva, one of Hinduism's most sacred gods, was redesigned. Traditionally, Shiva is the destroyer, depicted with long hair, 2 arms, and tiger skin clothing. The anime turned him into a young man with short hair, blue tattoos, 4 arms, and no shirt. For many Hindu viewers, this creative choice was disrespectful and misleading, because it altered the appearance of a deeply sacred figure in a way that stripped away its religious meaning. The backlash was strong enough that Netflix removed Shiva from the trailer, and when complaints continued, they pulled Record of Ragnarok from their streaming service in India altogether. Hittin the trail for Hallelujah Land. An early 1930s cartoon riverboat slides across the screen. Everything is bouncing, the music is blaring, and nobody ever stands still. A smiling pig is in charge. Everyone's singing, and the animation ignores gravity completely. If you're a studio exec in 1931, this looks like a hit already. If you're watching it now, you're about 10 seconds away from asking who thought this was a good idea. Released in 1931 as a Merry Melodies short, Hittin the Trail for Hallelujah Land was directed by Rudolf Ising and was built to be noisy, fast, and funny. What it actually delivers, though, is a parade of racial caricatures lifted from minstrel shows, a type of early entertainment built around white performers in blackface acting out exaggerated black stereotypes, all animated with enthusiasm and zero restraint. This is where people usually say, well, it was a different time, and they're not wrong. It was also a time when domestic violence was treated as normal, which tells you how much that excuse is really worth. Blackface imagery was everywhere in American entertainment back then. Live theater, radio, film, and animation all treated exaggerated black features and accents as harmless comedy. Early cartoons didn't invent any of this. They pulled it straight from what already existed and then pushed it even further, because exaggeration is baked into how animation works. The cartoon barely pretends to care about its own plot. It follows Piggy, his girlfriend Fluffy, and his Uncle Tom, mostly as an excuse to jump from one gag to the next. It opens on a cheerful steamboat drifting down a river, with Piggy at the helm while three blackface caricatures play music on a harmonica, banjo, and bones. Meanwhile, Uncle Tom and Fluffy are riding a donkey cart toward the boat, because, well, why not? Piggy and Fluffy reunite, but the story immediately loses interest and coherence. Uncle Tom ends up trapped in a cemetery. Piggy fights three dancing skeletons to save him, and then Fluffy is kidnapped by a villain. Piggy rescues her, and that's the ending. At the time, Warner Brothers didn't see this as risky. These shorts played before movies were meant for general audiences and were treated as disposable entertainment. Once they ran their course, the assumption was simple. No one would care later. That assumption aged badly. By the 1960s, American culture started doing something it had avoided for decades, which was actually looking back. The civil rights movement forced media companies to confront what they had normalized for years. As people began to question how racism shaped media, Warner Brothers quietly pulled Hittin the Trail for Hallelujah Land and 10 other cartoons from circulation. Pokemon. It's Saturday afternoon in the late 90s. The kid is in front of the TV watching Pokemon, a cartoon about a 10-year-old named Ash who travels around collecting pocket monsters that fight on his behalf. His main partner is Pikachu, a yellow mouse thing that shoots electricity. The villains, Team Rocket, are two young adults who spend most episodes getting electrocuted, blasted into the sky, and somehow surviving, which already tells you the show isn't big on realism. In December 1997, what was meant to be just another regular episode took an unexpected turn. It was called Denno Senshi Porygon, and it sent Ash, Pikachu, and the gang into a digital world to stop Team Rocket from messing with the computer system. Think early internet visuals complete with bright colors and lots of flashing lights. Near the end of the episode, Pikachu fires an electric attack that triggers an explosion filled with rapid red and blue flashes. Within minutes of the episode airing in Japan, children started experiencing seizures, dizziness, nausea, and blackouts. Hospitals filled up fast, and news helicopters showed up to cover the whole thing. By the end of the night, over 600 children were hospitalized, and nearly 12,000 more reported milder symptoms. This whole mess became known as Pokemon shock, and it triggered an immediate response. The episode was pulled the same day and permanently banned. It has never aired again, never been officially released, and will not show up in any legal Pokemon collection. And the character Porygon, who technically did nothing wrong, was sentenced to cartoon death by association. Pokemon was pulled off the air for months, while broadcasters panicked and regulators rushed to rewrite animation safety rules. After that, anime studios were stuck with strict limits on flashing lights, color intensity, and frame speed. One episode managed to permanently change how an entire industry animates explosions, which is honestly impressive in a very unfortunate way. Pokemon Shock was the beginning of the franchise's on-air troubles, but it definitely wasn't the end. In 2001, Saudi Arabia banned Pokemon completely, saying that trading cards encouraged gambling and pushed ideas about evolution that clashed with the country's religious beliefs. In Turkey, the show was banned in 2000 after reports that 2 kids jumped off balconies thinking they had superhuman abilities like the Pokemon. And in schools all over the world, Pokemon cards got banned for the most obvious reason possible. When you mix passionate kids with endless arguments over rare cards, the nurse's office suddenly becomes the busiest place in the building. But despite seizures, government bans, and playground chaos, the franchise went on to make billions. Ash never aged, Team Rocket kept getting electrocuted, and Pikachu went on to become one of the most recognizable characters on Earth. Happy Tree Friends. Happy Tree Friends. A blue moose is chopping wood in a bright, cheerful forest. Birds are chirping, and it feels like the start of a perfectly normal cartoon morning. You expect mild shenanigans, maybe a bonk on the head and some laughter. Instead, the axe slips, ricochets, and sets off a chain reaction. Seconds later, there's blood, real screaming, and a level of violence that absolutely does not belong in a show that looked this harmless 5 seconds ago. That is what a typical Happy Tree Friends episode looks like. The series launched online in 2000, created by Rode Montiel, Aubrey Ankrum, and Ken Navarro. Visually, it looks like your average kids show. Bright colors, rounded shapes, smiling animals. But underneath that, the entire show is built around graphic injuries and deaths triggered by simple everyday mistakes. There are no villains and no lessons, just cute characters meeting brutal ends again and again. The episodes are short, mostly silent and easy to click by accident. Characters squeak instead of talking, so there's no context, which just makes the violence hit even harder. Adults see it as dark slapstick, but for kids, it's a recipe for childhood trauma, and that's why governments worldwide decided to step in. In 2008, Russian Media Culture Protection Department decided they had seen enough tiny woodland suffering. They flagged the show for promoting violence and harming children's moral development.
But that is about all we can show you, because the Happy Tree Friends have been taken off the air in Russia after a government body decided they promoted violence and abuse.
The TV channel airing it tried to resist at first, but they backed down when they realized the government was absolutely not joking about it. By 2021, a court in St. Petersburg officially banned the show, along with a few anime titles. They explained that the series contained cruelty, damaged spiritual education, and contradicted the whole idea of raising kids to be gentle human beings. Hard to argue with that when every episode ends with at least one character going through a Final Destination-style ordeal. Parents all over the world have shared the same concern. They think the violence might influence their kids, and honestly, you can't blame them. To be fair, creators actually try to warn everyone. Their website spells it out, and each episode starts with a giant warning that might as well say, "Please do not blame us for what your child sees next." Yet, kids still sneak in to watch it, because the characters are brightly colored and look like they belong on lunchboxes. Cat takes 3 girls into a cramped apartment bathroom to do adult stuff while a party rages outside. Someone opens the door. More people pile in. And before you can process what you're watching, the police make an appearance and chaos breaks out. A gun goes off, the toilet explodes, water floods the room, and the talking cat slips away like this kind of thing happens to him twice a week. That scene is from Fritz the Cat. Released in 1972 and directed by Ralph Bakshi, Fritz the Cat was a deliberate middle finger to the idea that animation was automatically wholesome. Bakshi took a talking animal, dropped him into a dirty, exaggerated version of 1960s America, and let him drift through intimacy, drugs, political posturing, and violence with zero interest in consequences or moral lessons. The result was historic and immediately controversial. Fritz the Cat became the first animated film to receive an X rating in the United States. That rating alone was enough to send regulators in other countries into full panic mode. Malaysia and New Zealand blocked it for its over-the-line content. The Maldives and Singapore cited its mix of violence, drugs, profanity, and explicit material. Spain banned it for being offensive and explicit. Across the board, the concern remained the same. Ironically, the film was a massive success. It grossed over $90 million worldwide, making it one of the most successful independent films of its time. Critics in the 1970s praised its satire, social commentary, and raw style, even as others tore into it for racial stereotyping, graphic content, and what they saw as an unfocused, chaotic plot. Whether people loved it or hated it, nobody missed the point. But there was someone who hated it more than the censor boards, and that was creator Robert Crumb. The film was actually based on Crumb's underground comic strip, and that relationship did not end well. Crumb, who leaned left politically, felt the film mocked the political left and misunderstood his work. When he saw the finished film in early 1972, He hated it. He tried to distance himself from the project, and when his lawsuit failed to get him what he wanted, he made his feelings clear in another way. Later that same year, Crumb published a comic where Fritz is brutally killed and announced he was done with the character forever. He also wrote directly to the filmmakers, telling them not to use his characters again. Tier 3. Sunday Go to Meetin Time. A man skips church to roll dice, gets caught, runs off again, tries to steal a few chickens, and gets knocked out for his trouble. The next thing he knows, he's standing in a courtroom in hell while a demon judge reads out his sins like a shopping list. This scene is from the 1936 Merry Melodies short Sunday Go to Meetin Time, directed by Fritz Freleng and released by Warner Brothers. It was marketed as a light-hearted cartoon about a black community preparing for Sunday church, which sounds harmless enough until you realize that it leaned hard on racial caricatures. The characters are drawn with exaggerated features and visual cues signaling laziness, ignorance, and superstition as quickly as possible. The jokes don't really come from timing or clever setups. Instead, they come from reducing a whole community to a bundle of stereotypes about gambling, chaos, and bad morals. Religion isn't treated like faith either. It's treated like a setup for laughs, and the so-called moral lesson only works if you accept the stereotypes are doing all the heavy lifting. When it was released, the reaction outside the United States was what you'd expect from normal people. The British Board of Film Censors rejected it outright, and the cartoon was banned in both Australia and Germany. Even by 1930 standards, it was seen as offensive. But unsurprisingly, it kept circling in the US trade. Papers praised it using language that leaned fully into racist framing, and that approval helped keep it alive for years. By industry standards, it was considered a success. That changed much later. In 1968, Warner Brothers took the hint and removed Sunday Go to Meetin Time and the rest of the censored 11 from television once it became clear they never should have been airing in the first place. School days. Imagine you're a Japanese TV executive in 2007. You've been airing teen romance anime for weeks, and today's final episode should be nothing more than blushes and awkward breakups. Instead, what you get is a girl who skips the confession entirely and takes a page straight out of Yuka Takaoka's book. Yeah, that episode is not airing. That's School Days. This show presents itself as a harmless high school romance. Train rides, shy glances, love triangles, the usual stuff. Underneath that, the story slowly falls apart around Makoto, an indecisive teenage boy who dates whoever's in front of him, refuses to genuinely commit to one partner, and assumes nothing bad will happen. The series lets the emotional damage pile up quietly until it finally explodes. And the ending is where everything went off the rails. The finale shows one of the girls Makoto has been involved with, claiming to be pregnant, stabbing him to death after she can no longer tolerate his cheating. His original girlfriend then retaliates, cutting her open to confirm whether she was actually pregnant, killing her in the process. Up until the bloodshed, everyone was just a bunch of ordinary students, or so it seemed. Japanese broadcasters pulled the episode before it aired and replaced the entire time slot with footage of boats and European scenery. There was no explanation on screen, just boats. That alone told viewers something had gone very wrong. The decision wasn't only about shock value. Just days earlier, a 16-year-old girl in Western Japan had killed her father with a small axe because, according to her, she didn't like him. He was a 45-year-old local cop, found dead in bed, and the girl was discovered covered in blood at home. With something tragic happening just days before, airing an anime episode where a girl just stabs her boyfriend to death felt irresponsible, so the finale got pulled. China went further and banned the entire series, pointing to its mix of adult content, emotional manipulation, and graphic violence. All this and rabbits too. Picture a movie theater in 1941. You're waiting for the main film. The lights are still half up, and a Bugs Bunny cartoon comes on because that's what cartoons are for. Quick laughs. Just something to sit through before the feature. Then the hunter shows up on screen. He's unarmed, but everyone watching knows exactly what he's supposed to be. He has big lips, bug eyes, a thick accent, and his every move is exaggerated. The audience laughs right away before Bugs even does anything remotely funny because they've already identified the joke. All this and Rabbit Stew was released in September 1941 under Warner Brothers' Merry Melodies and was directed by Tex Avery. It also ended up being the last Bugs Bunny short directed by Tex Avery to be released. It came out when Avery had already left Warner Brothers, so his name doesn't appear in the credits. The story itself is simple and familiar. A hunter chases Bugs. Bugs embarrasses the hunter at every turn. They end up gambling, and the hunter loses everything, including his clothes and his dignity. Bugs walks off, pleased with himself, and the cartoon ends right there. The real issue lies in who the cartoon is mocking. Reviews back then openly described the hunter as Sambo, or a little boy. At the time, that language didn't raise eyebrows, even though Sambo was a racist label rooted in colonial and Jim Crow era stereotypes. It flattened black characters into something childish and foolish, and audiences were just supposed to laugh the moment they saw it. Critics loved the short. Trade papers praised how funny it was and how audiences would eat it up. They highlighted the hunter's confusion and humiliation as the main source of laughs, without questioning why his shame was the joke. Decades later, the question couldn't be ignored. By 1968, Warner Brothers reviewed its catalog and decided All This and Rabbit Stew was no longer acceptable for circulation. Deadman Wonderland. Ever wonder what would happen if the government built a prison that doubled as a theme park and forced its inmates to fight to the death for the amusement of paying customers? That's basically the premise of Deadman Wonderland, a manga by Jinsei Kataoka and Kazuma Kondo that ran from 2007 to 2013 and was later adapted into a 12-episode anime in 2011. The show really kicks off when a mysterious figure covered in blood and crimson armor massacres an entire classroom, killing everyone except one student. Within days, he's framed for the crime, sentenced to a prison on death row, and fitted with a poison-injecting collar that can only be neutralized if he earns a strange candy-like medicine through games, performances, or deadly competitions. Inside the prison, the rules are simple: survive or die. Some inmates can manipulate their blood into weapons, and others are forced to fight each other while anonymous spectators pay to watch the carnage. When it was time to adapt the manga into anime, the studio knew all hell would break loose if they didn't try to tone things down. So they blurred or cut extreme gore and violence. They even censored a transgender character, which fans rightly found offensive. Even with those edits, the show's reputation only got darker. Chinese regulators banned it outright, pointing to the mix of minors, executions, and spectacle as too extreme for broadcast. The anime adapted only the first 21 chapters of the manga. Manglow, the studio behind it, removed characters, cut storylines, and rushed the pacing. When it went under, there was no continuation. Tier 4. Uncle Tom's Bungalow. What if someone took the concept of slavery and turned it into one of the most offensive cartoon shorts ever made, then played it for laughs on a Sunday afternoon? That's Uncle Tom's Bungalow. Released in 1937 as part of Warner Brothers' Merry Melodies series and directed by Tex Avery, the short was pitched as a parody of Uncle Tom's Cabin. The original novel was deadly serious. Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote it in 1852 to expose the cruelty of slavery, and it helped shape public opinion against it before the Civil War. The cartoon takes that legacy and strips it for parts. The plot barely pretends to care about the source material. A black man is sold early on like a household appliance. Slavery becomes slapstick, and the tension revolves around debts and punchlines instead of freedom or violence. When Uncle Tom reappears at the end suddenly wealthy, the narrator jokes about Social Security before revealing the money came from cheating at dice. The joke lands squarely on racist stereotypes that were already well worn by the 1930s. The humor depends entirely on caricature. Faces are distorted, speech is turned into a joke, and the characters are presented as naive, dishonest, or foolish before they even open their mouths. Even the term Uncle Tom, which Stowe intended as a tragic figure, meant to highlight moral cruelty, had already morphed into an insult. The cartoon leans into that version without hesitation. You can see why it's on this list. At the time, nobody blinked. Trade papers called it clever and amusing. It played in theaters, people laughed, and the studio moved on. Decades later, Warner Brothers finally revisited its catalog and decided some things couldn't be defended anymore. By the late 1960s, Uncle Tom's Bungalow was pulled from American television. Jungle Jitters. If you go watch this short looking for a moral lesson, you won't find much beyond the idea that the jungle is loud, dangerous, and full of people ready to cook you alive. Released in 1938 by Warner Brothers and directed by Fritz Freleng, the cartoon follows Elmer, a dog-faced traveling salesman who wanders into a jungle with a suitcase full of random goods. He thinks he's there to sell household items. The villagers, meanwhile, see his arrival as dinner. Yes, cannibalism. And the entire short run on that misunderstanding, with Elmer pitching products while the people around him quietly plan to cook him. The cartoon doesn't bother giving the villagers any depth. They exist purely as a setup for jokes and are portrayed as completely primitive and disconnected from civilization. Their culture centers on cannibalism, confusion, and chaos, and the humor comes entirely from treating them as incapable of understanding anything else. Things escalate when the tribe's queen decides she's going to marry Elmer on the spot, turning the rest of the short into a string of panic gags that end with him jumping into a boiling pot to escape. His final words were a half-finished wish that his captors get indigestion.
I hope they all get indigestion. I hope.
So much good that'd do. Audiences in the 1930s somehow thought this was hilarious. But by the 1960s, times had changed and Jungle Jitters didn't age well. Warner Brothers quietly took it off TV in 1968. Elfen Lied. Ever wonder where Stranger Things got the idea for 11? Well, part of it comes from a 2004 anime called Elfen Lied, which the Duffer Brothers themselves called Ultraviolet E.T., whatever that means. The show kicks off with Lucy, a mutant called a Diclonius, breaking out of a secret lab. She's got small horns and invisible telekinetic arms called vectors that slice through guards like they're nothing. She gets shot, but instead of dying, the injury triggers a split personality. And now there's Killer Lucy and the innocent, childlike Mew. The next day, 2 college students find her naked and bleeding on a beach and take her in. From there, domestic awkwardness collides with extreme gore. Blood and body parts fly. People die in brutal ways, and nudity shows up without warning. The first 7 minutes alone were enough to make most viewers run for the door. The anime adapts the manga, but cuts and alters huge chunks, leading to a rushed ending and underdeveloped storylines. Fans noticed inconsistencies, plot holes, and a main character who some called a straight-up psychopath. Critics weren't gentle either. Scenes of nudity and violence were called overly blatant, and the voice acting, both Japanese and English, was heavily criticized. Elfen Lied's content caused trouble beyond criticism. China and Russia banned it, citing the combination of extreme violence, gore, and adult content as harmful for young viewers. Despite its controversy, Elfen Lied left its mark. The Duffer Brothers have cited it as inspiration for Eleven's character in Stranger Things. The influence is obvious in Eleven's powers, the lab experimentation, and the darker edges of a seemingly innocent story. Angel Puss. If someone made a cartoon today about a kid being paid to drown a cat, PETA and every well-meaning citizen on the internet would probably have an aneurysm. In 1944, it was treated as peak entertainment. Angel Puss opens with Sambo, a black boy drawn with exaggerated blackface-styled features walking across a bridge with a sack. Inside the sack is a cat, and his job is to drown it. He drags the bag like it's a chore he doesn't want to do, hesitates for a moment, and that hesitation saves the cat. The animal slips out, fills the sack with bricks, hides nearby, and lets Sambo throw it into the water, thinking the job's done. Then, the cat paints itself white, sticks on a halo, and starts pretending to be a ghost. That's when the cartoon fully commits to terrorizing the kid for laughs. The short was released in June 1944 by Warner Brothers and directed by Chuck Jones, one of the key figures behind Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and Porky Pig. The racial caricature is impossible to miss, and the entire premise rests on 2 ideas played for humor. A black child is disposable comic relief, and killing an animal is treated like a silly errand. Even for the 1940s, that combination didn't sit right with everyone. On October 7, 1944, Herman Hill called it out directly in an editorial for the Pittsburgh Courier. He reported that black theatergoers were actively protesting the cartoon, especially in Los Angeles. The backlash got worse because Angel Puss was being shown alongside March of Time's Americans for All, a short Warner Brothers ordered to play nationwide to promote racial tolerance. Seeing a cartoon built on racist stereotypes paired with an anti-prejudice film made the contradiction impossible to ignore. March of Time later clarified they had no control over the pairing and admitted it showed poor judgment. None of that criticism reached a mainstream film press. Trade magazines praised Angel Puss without hesitation. Box Office called it a delectable bit that played on colored boys' fear of the supernatural and promised hearty chuckles as the cat terrorized him, until the end when he eventually kills it. Yes, not the ending you might have expected, but it was the 1940s. Despite protests from black newspapers, Warner Brothers pushed the short anyway. It ran briefly. Then in 1968, it was pulled from circulation. Tier 5. Waltz with Bashir. Ever had a nightmare that felt too real to be a dream? One where you're running away from 26 rabid dogs tearing through your city? That's how Waltz with Bashir opens. The film starts in 2006 with Israeli filmmaker Ari Folman talking to his friend Boaz. Boaz keeps having the same nightmare about those dogs. At first it sounds impossible, but he insists it's real. Back in the 1982 Lebanon War, he had to shoot every single one of them, one by one, just to keep villagers from noticing soldiers had moved in. That moment cracks something open for Ari. He realizes he has buried his own memories of the war so deep he can barely remember being there. From there, Ari tracks down old friends, soldiers, and a war reporter to piece together what happened. Slowly, he uncovers the truth. His unit was at the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps, while hundreds of civilians were massacred by Lebanese militia, with Israeli forces standing by and firing flares. Ari didn't pull the trigger, but the film shows how guilt can feel like complicity. Animation gives the story its edge. Surreal visuals, shifting timelines, and distorted recollections let viewers feel the fragments of memory instead of just seeing them. By the end, the animation melts into real news footage of the massacre, and the impact hits harder than words ever could. Lebanon banned the film immediately. It is an Israeli production, which was technically illegal to screen anyway. But the real issue is that the movie forces viewers to see the war through the eyes of soldiers, some of whom were considered the enemy. Governments do not like that kind of perspective. Clean Pastures. If heaven looked like a Harlem nightclub and the angels had to compete for attention, that would mean real life is basically this short called Clean Pastures. In the cartoon, a black angel stands on a sidewalk next to a sign that promises entry to heaven, but nobody pays him any mind. People keep walking, heading into nightclubs, rolling dice, drinking and dancing. Up in the clouds, heaven notices it's being ignored and decides to shake things up, turning the afterlife into a swinging, jazz-filled, gambling-heavy spectacle called Paradise. Angels and St. Peter appear as minstrel-style caricatures, and even the devil tries to sneak in at the end just to enjoy the music. Clean Pastures came out in 1937, directed by Friz Freleng as a parody of The Green Pastures, a 1936 film that retold Bible stories with an all-black cast. That film was already controversial for its depiction of God and biblical figures. Warner Brothers took the concept, stripped away nuance, and made the afterlife a non-stop party that doubled as a vehicle for racial caricatures. People were shown as primitive and ignorant. The angelic hierarchy was used for comedy, and the line between entertainment and offensive stereotype blurred completely. From the start, censors had problems with it. Hollywood's production code flagged the cartoon for mocking heaven, turning gambling and drinking into jokes, and ignoring the rules around religious depictions. The depiction of a black heaven only made it more uncomfortable. Despite that, the cartoon ran briefly, and trade publications barely noticed the problematic content. Over time, critics and historians started looking back. Scholars noted that black audiences had largely ignored it at the time, but the stereotypes were being broadcast to everyone else. By 1968, Warner Brothers pulled Clean Pastures from circulation. Coal Black and the Sebben Dwarfs. What if someone took a classic bedtime story and turned it into a cartoon filled with blackface, X-rated characters, and murder-for-hire jokes? That's Coal Black and the Sebben Dwarfs. The short came out in January 1943, directed by Bob Clampett. It's a swing-era parody of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, with jazz music and an all-black cast of characters. At first, it sounds clever, maybe even inclusive, but the cartoon is a non-stop parade of blackface imagery, adult-coded characters, and wartime racism. Nearly every role relies on a stereotype. The Queen is a broad mammy figure, So White is hypersexualized, and the Prince struts around in a zoot suit, a flashy, oversized suit popular in the 1940s, with gold teeth. Even the opening child narrator is a Pickaninny caricature. The short also weaves in World War II propaganda. Motion Picture Exhibitor called it very funny. The Film Daily praised it as an amusing satire and casually used racist terms when describing the characters. Clearly, the audience it was made for was being entertained, not questioned. Some viewers did push back, though. In April 1943, the NAACP formally protested the short and urged Warner Brothers to withdraw it. Over time, Coal Black became a key example when critics discussed racism in early animation. By 1968, United Artists, which controlled the Warner Brothers cartoon library then, officially pulled it from circulation. Tin Pan Alley Cats. This one was also directed by Bob Clampett, and this time he decided to push everything to the extreme. After Coal Black and the Seven Dwarfs, Clampett wanted to make another wild cartoon, and that's how Tin Pan Alley Cats came to be. It was released in 1943 as part of the Merry Melodies series, and it shared the same jazzy soundtrack, frantic animation, and the same racial caricatures that eventually got it banned. The story followed a black alley cat, clearly modeled after jazz musician Fats Waller. The cat stands in front of two doors, One leads to the Kit Kat Club, the other to Uncle Tomcat Mission. Someone warns him to avoid the club, which is full of wine, women, and music. But of course, that only makes him more curious. He immediately heads inside. At the club, the cat gets so caught up in the music that he passes out and has a wild dream. In it, he meets giant versions of Joseph Stalin, a leader of the Soviet Union, Hideki Tojo, the Japanese prime minister during World War II, and he who must not be named. Oh no, not him, him. The dream terrifies him, and when he wakes, he leaves the partying behind and joins the mission band instead. Clampett's defenders like to argue that the cartoon was bursting with creativity and jazz. But by the late 1960s, the studio could no longer ignore what it was built on. Blackface-style animation, a warped parody of Fats Waller, Uncle Tom jokes, and flat stereotypes about black neighborhoods. That's why Tin Pan Alley Cats was pulled for good. That's the end of today's Iceberg. If this iceberg showed anything, it's that cartoons aren't always just cartoons. That's all for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe.